Pearson drawing should have symbolized family, love, and hope, until the millionaire watched his fiancée tear it apart before the nanny's eyes. In that single, cruel act, a wedding, a future, and a secret choice shattered. What he does next will leave everyone breathless. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion, warming the nursery with a golden glow. Elena knelt on the soft rug beside Lila, her gentle hands guiding the little girl's crayons across the paper. The room was filled with quiet laughter, the kind of laughter that belonged to two souls who had found comfort in each other. Lila hummed softly as she sketched, her tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth in concentration, her small fingers smudged with bright shades of red and blue. "You're doing beautifully," Elena whispered, brushing a stray lock of chestnut hair from the child's forehead. "What are we drawing today?" Lila's dark eyes lit up, mirroring her excitement. "A family," she said with innocent certainty. "Our family." She pressed harder with the crayon, outlining three figures that stood together beneath the arch of a rainbow. Elena's chest tightened at the word, "our." It was not the first time Lila had said it, but each time it pierced her heart with both joy and sorrow. Joy, because the little girl saw her as more than just someone hired to care for her. Sorrow, because Elena knew her place hired help, an outsider in a mansion that wasn't hers. Still, she smiled, unwilling to let her emotions shadow Lila's happiness. "And who's this?" she asked, pointing to the tall figure in the middle of the drawing. "That's Daddy," Lila said, proudly. She scribbled golden streaks around the figure's head to show Christopher's blonde hair. "And that's you." She carefully drew a dress for the smaller woman beside him. "And that's me." She pressed her hand over the little figure with a grin, her joy uncontainable. Elena swallowed, forcing her smile to stay steady. The paper was so innocent, yet so powerful. It showed everything Lila longed for but had never truly known. A family where warmth replaced loneliness, where love filled the empty corners of the grand halls. "You've made us look very happy," Elena said softly, her voice almost breaking. Lila leaned into her, wrapping small arms around Elena's waist. "Because you make me happy," she whispered. Her words were pure, untouched by the coldness that often drifted through the house when others were present. Elena's throat tightened, and she kissed the top of the little girl's head. She wanted to freeze this moment, to hold on to it forever. But before she could, the sharp click of heels echoed from the corridor outside, breaking the fragile piece like glass shattering on marble. The door opened, and Vanessa swept into the room. She was stunning, as always, her designer dress hugging her figure, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her jewelry glittering under the light. But her eyes, sharp and calculating, carried none of the warmth that Lila had drawn on the paper. "Well," Vanessa said, her tone dripping with disdain as her gaze fell on Elena and the child curled at her side. "What do we have here?" Lila sat up proudly and held out the picture. "Look, Vanessa, I made a family. Daddy, me, and Elena." For a moment, silence filled the air. Vanessa's painted lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. She took the paper delicately from Lila's small hands, her long nails tapping against it. She tilted her head, studying it with an expression Elena couldn't read until the sneer appeared. "Family?" Vanessa's laugh was sharp and humorless. She looked at Elena with icy contempt. "That's rich. She's the nanny, Lila. She doesn't belong in this." Elena's stomach clenched, but she stayed silent. She had learned long ago that answering back only gave Vanessa more fuel. Lila's face fell. "But she makes me happy." "She is here to work, not to pretend," Vanessa cut in, her voice like a knife, slicing through the child's joy. With a flick of her wrist, she ripped the paper clean in half. The sound of tearing was louder than thunder in that quiet room. Lila gasped, her small hands flying to her mouth, her eyes filled with tears, wide and disbelieving as the pieces of her dream fluttered to the rug. "Vanessa!" Elena exclaimed softly, unable to stop herself this time. but her protest was drowned out by the sobs that burst from Lila's chest. The little girl's grief was raw, a sound that pierced through the air and straight into Elena's heart. Elena gathered her quickly, rocking her gently as the child cried against her shoulder. Sweetheart, it's all right, we can draw another one," she whispered, though the lie tasted bitter. The picture wasn't just paper, it was Lila's hope, her longing made visible, and Vanessa had destroyed it with one cruel gesture. Vanessa crossed her arms, watching with smug satisfaction. Better she learns now, life isn't about fairy tales. Her eyes flicked over Elena, dismissing her with a look that made her feel smaller than ever. Elena bit her lip hard, holding back tears of her own. She would not let Vanessa see her break. She would be strong for Lila. But inside, her heart cracked. She wanted to scream, to tell Vanessa how heartless she was, but the words stuck in her throat. And then, as if fate had chosen the perfect moment, the heavy footsteps of Christopher Blackwood echoed in the hall. The door swung wider, and he appeared, tall and commanding, his presence filling the room in an instant. His eyes moved quickly, from Elena cradling his daughter to the torn pieces of paper scattered like broken dreams across the floor, to Vanessa standing with that proud tilt of her chin. The air grew tense, thick with something unspoken. Christopher's gaze lingered on the fragments of the drawing, his jaw tightening. He hadn't seen the whole truth, but he knew enough to sense that something was wrong. "What's going on in here?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a warning beneath the words. Vanessa smiled sweetly, too sweetly. "Oh, darling, nothing at all, just a silly little tantrum over some scribbles." Lila's sobs quieted slightly, but her body trembled in Elena's arms. She pressed her face deeper into Elena's shoulder, unwilling to look at her father with tears streaming down her cheeks. Elena lowered her eyes, torn between speaking and staying silent. She wanted to tell him, wanted to defend Lila's small, broken heart. But the weight of Vanessa's glare pressed against her like a hand on her throat, daring her to try. Christopher took a step closer, his sharp gaze scanning the scene once more. The shredded picture at his feet seemed to accuse him, demanding an answer he wasn't yet ready to give. The silence stretched, heavy with secrets and fragile truths, as the future of this family-to-be trembled in the balance. Luna bent down, her voice trembling but soft, trying to gather the scraps of paper as if she could piece back together what had been so cruelly torn apart. Lila's sobs grew louder, her small fists wiping furiously at her cheeks, the colors of the drawing smudged and broken in her tiny hands. Elena wanted to shield her, to hold her close, but in that moment she felt powerless. The cruelty had already been done, and the innocent beauty of the child's dream had been stolen in a single gesture of disdain. "Could she do that?" Lila cried, her wide, tearful eyes fixed on Elena's face, demanding an answer that Elena could not bear to give. How could she explain malice to a child who only wanted love? Elena gathered Lila into her arms, rocking her gently, her heart breaking as she whispered soothing words she barely believed herself. "It's all right, sweetheart. We'll draw another one, an even bigger one with more colors. No one can take away what's in your heart," but she felt the sting of helplessness pressing down on her chest. The truth was, it wasn't just a drawing. It was Lila's wish, her fragile dream, ripped apart in front of her eyes. Vanessa stood nearby, arms crossed, her expression unrepentant. "Honestly, Elena," she said, with a voice coated in mock patience, "you encourage this nonsense. The child needs discipline, not silly fantasies. Do you really think it's healthy for her to imagine that you belong here, like some mother figure? You're confusing her, and I won't allow it." Her words were like poison, seeping into the air, turning the atmosphere of the room bitter and cold. Elena's cheeks burned with shame, but behind the shame simmered anger, an anger she swallowed down for the sake of the little girl in her arms. Lila clung tighter to Elena, sobbing into her shoulder. "You are my mama," she said fiercely, between hiccuped cries, her small voice trembling with defiance. The words pierced Elena's heart, both warming and breaking it at once. Elena closed her eyes, pressing her lips to the top of Lila's head, as if to draw strength from her innocence. She wanted so badly to protect her from the harshness of the world, from Vanessa's cruelty, from the cold walls of a home that should have been a sanctuary, but felt like a battlefield. It was at that precise moment that Christopher's voice cut through the tension, deep and commanding, yet edged with confusion. "What's going on here?" he asked, stepping into the room, his eyes immediately taking in the sight of Lila's tears, the scraps of colored paper scattered across the floor, and Elena kneeling with his daughter clutched tightly to her chest. His brow furrowed as he moved closer, his gaze flickering between them and then settling sharply on Vanessa. Something was wrong, and he could sense it, though the full truth still hovered out of reach. Vanessa quickly smoothed her expression into one of false innocence, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Darling," she began, her voice sweetened unnaturally. "It's nothing, just a little tantrum. You know how children can be." She bent to pick up one of the torn pieces of paper, her manicured fingers holding it delicately, as though she hadn't been the one to rip it apart only moments ago. She was upset about this drawing. Just silly scribbles, really. I was trying to explain that it wasn't appropriate, and she overreacted. Christopher's jaw tightened as he studied the fragment in her hand. Even in its torn state, the colors were bright, the lines earnest. He could see the outlines of 3 figures holding hands, himself, his daughter, and Elena. Something stirred in his chest, a strange mix of tenderness and unease. He looked back at Lila, her tear-streaked face pressed into Elena's shoulder, and then at Elena herself, whose eyes avoided his, filled with The tension in the room was palpable, like a storm on the edge of breaking. "Is that true?" Christopher asked quietly, his eyes narrowing on Vanessa. "You tore this?" His voice was calm, but beneath the calmness was steel, a warning that made Vanessa hesitate. For the briefest second, her mask slipped, and he caught the flicker of irritation in her eyes before she quickly composed herself again. "Christopher," she said with a laugh that was far too light, "you're overreacting. It was just a piece of paper. Don't tell me you're going to scold me over crayons and scribbles." She waved her hand dismissively, but the disdain in her tone was impossible to miss. She wasn't just dismissing the drawing, she was dismissing Lila's feelings, Elena's presence, and everything that moment had meant. Elena's throat tightened. Words caught like thorns. She wanted to speak, to defend Lila, but her place in the household was precarious. She was the nanny, nothing more. To challenge Vanessa openly would risk everything, yet silence felt like betrayal. Lila's small fingers gripped her blouse tightly, and Elena drew in a shaky breath, finally finding her voice. "It wasn't just paper," she said softly but firmly, her eyes lifting to meet Christopher. "To words, her dream." The words hung in the air, fragile yet powerful, carrying the weight of truth that could not be ignored. Christopher's gaze softened as he looked at Lila again, his daughter trembling in Elena's arms. He crouched down, gently brushing a lock of hair from her wet cheek. "Sweetheart," he whispered, his tone full of warmth, "show me what you drew." Lila shook her head, clutching the broken pieces against her chest. "She broke it," she cried. "She said Elena doesn't belong." Her words struck like lightning, illuminating everything that had been hidden in shadows. Christopher's eyes flickered up to Vanessa, and for the first time, a crack appeared in his carefully composed demeanor. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating, broken only by Lila's muffled sobs. Vanessa opened her mouth to protest, but Christopher raised his hand, stopping her cold. His eyes, once filled with confusion, now blazed with something harder, sharper. He didn't speak immediately, but the weight of his silence spoke louder than any words could. Elena held her breath, sensing a shift in the air, sensing that this moment was not just about a drawing, but about something far deeper, a truth that had been waiting to be revealed. And then, slowly, Christopher rose to his full height, his presence filling the room with authority. He looked down at the scraps of paper on the floor, then at Elena, then finally at Vanessa. The pieces of the puzzle had not yet come together, but something inside him told him that everything had just changed. He didn't know how or why, but he knew this much. Nothing about this family, his family, would ever be the same again. Christopher Sterling stood in the grand living room, his hands resting on the back of a leather armchair as he watched his daughter's tears streak down her small face. Lila clung tightly to Elena, burying her wet cheeks in the nanny's shoulder. He had walked in moments earlier to find scraps of colored paper on the floor and an air of sharp unease. Though no one spoke at first, the tension pressed against him like a wall. "Shoo, it's all right, sweetheart," Elena whispered, rocking Lila gently in her arms. Her voice carried the kind of warmth that soothed even Christopher's frayed nerves. But behind her calm tone, he noticed something else. Sorrow, hiding just beneath the surface, like a wound carefully bandaged, but still bleeding underneath. Vanessa, standing near the window, crossed her arms and sighed impatiently. "Christopher, honestly, you're overreacting," she said when she caught his questioning glance. "She's crying over a silly drawing. Children cry all the time." Christopher frowned. "What drawing?" Vanessa waved a dismissive hand. "Some childish sketch. Elena's been filling her head with silly fantasies. It's not healthy. I was simply correcting her." Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes lowered. Lila lifted her head, her little voice trembling. "It wasn't silly, Daddy. It was us. Me, you, and Elena," she sniffled, pointing toward the torn pieces scattered like fallen leaves on the rug. Christopher bent down slowly, picking up one of the halves. The crayon lines were jagged from where it had been ripped, but he could still see the bright colors: a house, a sun, and 3 smiling figures holding hands. His chest tightened as he realized what it meant. Vanessa's tone sharpened. "Christopher, really, are we going to indulge this? It's ridiculous. She needs to understand boundaries. Elena is the help, nothing more." The words sliced through the room, leaving silence in their wake. Elena didn't flinch outwardly, but Christopher caught the flicker in her eyes, a flash of pain that told him more than words could. He wanted to speak, to defend her, but Lila's sobs pulled him back. He gathered his daughter into his arms, pressing her small body against his chest. "It's okay, my love," he whispered. "Daddy's here." But even as he said it, he felt the cracks forming, fissures in the image of the life he had thought he was building. Later that evening, after Vanessa retreated upstairs with an air of irritation, Elena sat quietly at the kitchen table with Lila. A roll of tape lay between them, and carefully, piece by piece, Elena was mending the drawing. Her hands moved with patience, smoothing each tear, pressing each seam until the picture began to resemble itself again. Lila watched with wide, hopeful eyes. "Does it look okay, Elena?" Elena smiled softly, though her eyes glistened. "It looks perfect. See? Even when something breaks, we can fix it if we try. Dreams don't have to stay torn forever." Christopher stood silently in the doorway, unseen for the moment. He watched Elena lean down to kiss Lila's forehead, watched his daughter's face brighten as she clutched the patched drawing against her chest. He felt something stir inside him, a question he didn't want to ask yet. Why had Vanessa reacted so cruelly? Why did Elena, who was supposed to be just the nanny, feel more like family than the woman he was preparing to marry? The seed of doubt, once planted, was not easily ignored. The following morning, Vanessa confronted him in the study, her voice sharp as glass. "Christopher, I don't appreciate how you let that little scene go unaddressed last night. That woman is manipulating your daughter. She's..." Christopher set down his coffee cup, his gaze steady. "Dangerous notions? Of family? Of love?" Vanessa stiffened. "Of confusing fantasy with reality. You and I are getting married. Elena's place is in the background, not at the center of Lila's world." He leaned back, his mind replaying the sight of Elena patiently piecing together the drawing. "Perhaps you underestimate the impact she has," he said quietly. "Perhaps you underestimate what Lila needs." Vanessa's lips thinned. "What Lila needs is discipline, not fairy tales." The words lingered in the air long after she swept out of the room, her heels clicking like hammers against marble. Christopher sat alone, running a hand over his face. For the first time, he wondered if he had mistaken glitter for gold, promises for love. Meanwhile, Elena considered handing in her resignation. She had sat up late after putting Lila to bed, the thought gnawing at her. She could endure being belittled herself, but watching Lila's spirit crushed, that was harder. Yet every time she resolved to leave, Lila's small arms clung tighter, and her tearful whisper, "Please don't go, Elena, please stay." And so she stayed. But with every passing day, the cracks in the engagement widened. Elena's decision to stay wasn't born of selfishness, but of love. She rose each morning, determined to be Lila's shield, to be the steady warmth in a house often clouded by tension. She tucked away her own hurt, but Christopher saw it more clearly than she realized. One afternoon, he came home early from a meeting. The house was unusually quiet, except for the faint sound of laughter drifting from the garden. Curious, he followed it and paused at the sight before him. On the lawn, Lila sat cross-legged with markers spread around her. Elena knelt beside her, smiling as she guided the child's small hand across the paper. The repaired drawing lay beside them, now displayed proudly in a plastic sleeve, as if it were something precious. "See, Daddy?" Lila exclaimed when she noticed him. "Elena fixed it. Our family picture isn't broken anymore." Christopher's throat tightened. He crouched down, brushing Lila's hair from her face. "It's beautiful, darling." His eyes lifted to Elena's, meeting her steady gaze. In that moment, he felt a truth he could no longer ignore. She wasn't simply the help. She was the heart his daughter had been missing. That night, however, Vanessa unleashed her fury. She had discovered the taped picture framed on Lila's nightstand. "This is absurd," she snapped, slamming the door behind her as she stormed into Christopher's study. "You're letting that woman take liberties. She is nothing but an employee, and you're encouraging this madness by indulging it." Christopher rose slowly from his desk. "That woman, as you call her, has done more for my daughter's happiness than anyone else in this house. Including you?" Vanessa's eyes blazed. "You're blind, Christopher. She's playing the saint. But mark my words, she's after more than just her paycheck." He stepped closer, his voice low but unyielding. "What she's after is Lila's smile, and from where I stand, that's worth more than all the jewels and gowns in your closet." The air between them crackled with unspoken truths, with the realization that the life they were building was nothing more than fragile glass ready to shatter. Across the hall, Elena sat by Lila's bedside, softly humming a lullaby until the girl's eyes fluttered shut. She glanced at the framed drawing, its tape seams gleaming faintly under the lamplight, and whispered, "Hold on to your dreams, little one. Sometimes the cracks let the light in." Christopher watched from the doorway, unseen, his heart pounding. He felt the world he thought he knew tilt beneath him. The doubts were no longer whispers. They were loud, insistent, impossible to ignore. Days turned into weeks, and though outwardly the household functioned, underneath the fractures deepened. Vanessa grew more distant, her disdain for Elena sharper. Elena carried on, but each kindness she showed Lila seemed to illuminate Vanessa's cruelty by contrast. One evening, after a tense family dinner, Christopher found himself alone in the conservatory. The air smelled faintly of roses, and the glass ceiling reflected the pale moonlight. He sat in silence, but his mind swirled with images. Lila's laughter, Elena's patient smile, Vanessa's scornful sneer. It was then he understood. Love was not found in glittering parties or in carefully arranged alliances. It was found in the quiet mending of a child's broken dream, in the gentle hands that pieced together torn paper so a little girl could believe again. The cracks in the engagement were no longer cracks, they were fault lines, and soon the entire facade would crumble. The ballroom glowed with golden light, chandeliers dripping crystals that sent sparks across polished marble floors. Tables were dressed in ivory cloth, silver cutlery perfectly aligned, and champagne glasses chimed softly as servers weaved through the crowd. Christopher had agreed to host this society brunch at Vanessa's insistence, though he had little appetite for these staged performances of wealth and status. He only wanted to keep the peace for Lila's sake. Elena stood near the edge of the gathering, her posture poised but her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She was there only because Lila had begged her to come. The little girl had whispered into her ear that morning, promising she would feel braver if Elena were close by. So Elena had agreed, though she felt the weight of the polished stairs already burning into her back. Lila, dressed in a pale blue dress with a bow tied neatly at her waist, clung to Elena's hand as though she feared being swept away by the tide of glittering strangers. Her curls bounced as she leaned close to Elena, whispering her questions about the tall women in diamonds and the men whose laughter seemed too loud, too forced. Elena bent low, smiling gently, answering her in whispers that felt like safety. Across the room, Vanessa thrived in the spotlight. She was dazzling in an emerald gown that hugged her figure, every movement calculated, every smile crafted. She moved from guest to guest, brushing shoulders with old-money matriarchs, laughing too loudly at tired jokes, reminding everyone with her presence that she was soon to be Mrs. Christopher Hale. To her, this brunch was not about food or conversation. It was a stage. Christopher lingered near a cluster of businessmen, but his eyes kept drifting toward Elena and his daughter. He noticed the way Lila's small body seemed to loosen only when Elena knelt beside her, the way her laughter rang more freely when Elena spoke. He admired, though quietly, the tenderness Elena carried so effortlessly. In contrast, Vanessa's laughter. It was inevitable that the two worlds would collide. Vanessa, catching sight of Elena near the terrace, excused herself from her circle of admirers. Her heels clicked against the floor as she approached, her smile already sharpening into something less than kind. "Well," she said, her voice smooth but laced with poison. "It seems the help has dressed up today. How quaint." His remark carried just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Several heads turned, curiosity mingling with discomfort. Elena felt the heat rise to her cheeks, but she stood tall, smoothing the fabric of her modest cream dress. "I'm here because Lila wanted me by her side," Elena said softly, keeping her tone even. Vanessa arched an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Isn't that sweet? Though one might wonder if you're filling her little head with fantasies she doesn't need. Children do have such wild imaginations, don't they?" Christopher's jaw tightened from across the room. He began to move closer, his steps measured but steady. Elia's hand clutched Elena's tighter. The little girl frowned up at Vanessa, her lips trembling. Before Elena could reassure her, Lila blurted out, her small voice carrying farther than anyone expected. "You ripped my drawing." The words fell like a stone into a still pond, ripples spreading instantly. Conversations faltered. Forks clinked against plates, and then silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Dozens of eyes turned toward Vanessa, toward Elena, toward the child standing between them. Vanessa blinked once, her painted smile freezing. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a fraction too high. "You drawing," Lila said, louder this time, emboldened by the sudden hush in the room. "It was me and Daddy and Elena. You ripped it and called her names. You said she was just the help." A sharp gasp escaped from one of the ladies nearby. A gentleman cleared his throat uncomfortably, glancing at Christopher, who had reached them now, his expression unreadable but his presence towering. Christopher crouched down to his daughter's level, his eyes locking onto hers. "Lila," he said carefully, "is that true?" Lila's eyes brimmed with tears as she nodded, clutching the hem of Elena's dress. She tore it up. "I saw her." The weight of truth pressed against the room like an invisible hand. Christopher rose slowly, his gaze shifting to Vanessa. His voice was calm, but edged with steel. "Is there something you'd like to explain?" Vanessa let out a short, incredulous laugh, shaking her head as if dismissing the absurdity. "Honestly, Christopher, you can't possibly be taking the word of a child so seriously." She clearly misunderstood. "Children imagine things all the time. I was tidying up. That paper was just a mess of crayons, hardly worth anything." Her words only deepened the silence. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Elena felt the sting of humiliation burn through her chest, though she tried to keep her face serene. Christopher's eyes narrowed. "So, you're saying my daughter is lying?" "Pain," Vanessa countered smoothly. "That your daughter is confused. She spends far too much time with Elena, who seems to encourage these little daydreams. It's unhealthy. I was only trying to keep her grounded." Elena opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't want to spark more conflict, but her heart ached at the venom so casually wrapped in silk. She pressed Lila closer, whispering words of comfort into her hair. Christopher stood motionless, his silence louder than shouting. His mind replayed the fragile drawing Elena had carefully taped back together, the way his daughter's face had lit up when she saw it whole again. A seed of doubt had already been planted that day. Now it pushed through the soil, undeniable. The crowd remained tense, breaths held as though awaiting a verdict. Vanessa's confident smirk wavered, just barely, under the weight of so many watching eyes. Christopher's voice finally broke the stillness. "We will discuss this later, privately." It was not the defense Vanessa expected, nor the condemnation Elena feared, but the message was clear enough. The balance was shifting. Face broke into a snort. Vanessa plastered a smile back onto her face, though her knuckles whitened where her fingers clenched the stem of her champagne flute. "Of course, darling," she said, with brittle sweetness. "No need to make a scene in front of our guests." But the scene had already been made. Whispers rustled through the ballroom like dry leaves in the wind. Guests leaned toward one another, trading murmured theories about what they had just witnessed. To the society crowd, scandal was oxygen, and Vanessa had provided plenty. Elena wanted nothing more than to retreat, to scoop Lila into her arms and vanish from the sea of eyes. But she held her ground, knowing that fleeing would only confirm the cruelty Valenia had tried to cast upon her. Instead, she knelt beside Lila, brushing her hair back tenderly, reminding her that she was safe. Christopher watched this small act of love and felt something shift deeper inside him. How had he missed the contrast for so long? On one side, a woman who mocked, dismissed, and tore down. On the other, a woman who built, mended, and healed, even with nothing but tape, patience, and heart. The brunch carried on, though its glow had dimmed. Conversations resumed, but the air was thicker, heavier. Vanessa returned to her circle of friends, laughing too brightly, but her eyes darted often toward Christopher, measuring his silence. Christopher excused himself from his colleagues and stood by a tall window, staring out at the manicured gardens beyond. He felt anger simmer low in his chest, but more than that, he felt clarity beginning to form. His engagement, once unquestioned, now felt like a fragile structure balanced on lies and contempt. Behind him, Lila tugged on Elena's hand. "Can we go home?" she whispered, her voice still shaky. Elena hesitated, glancing at Christopher. He turned, his expression softening only for his daughter. "Soon, sweetheart," he said. Then his gaze flickered to Elena, gratitude unspoken but clear. The rest of the brunch blurred into obligation. Vanessa played the perfect hostess, her laugh like porcelain clinking, but cracks had formed beneath the gloss. Every stolen glance Christopher cast toward Elena deepened those cracks, widening them with unspoken truths. When the final guest had departed and the great doors closed, the silence inside the house felt deafening. The echo of the confrontation still lingered, as though the walls themselves had absorbed the tension. Christopher dismissed the staff for the evening and guided Lila upstairs, tucking her into bed with promises of safety. She clutched the repaired drawing against her chest, unwilling to let it go, even as her eyes drifted shut. He kissed her forehead, then lingered for a moment, watching her small chest rise and fall. Upstairs, Vanessa paced the sitting room, her gown catching the light like a jewel turned harsh. She whirled on Christopher as he entered, her voice sharp. "How dare you let her humiliate me in front of everyone?" Christopher's eyes hardened. "It wasn't Elena who humiliated you. It was your own words, your own actions." "Poisoning your daughter against me," Vanessa snapped. "Can't you see that? The girl worships her. It's unhealthy. She needs boundaries, not fairy tales." "What she needs," Christopher said evenly, "is kindness. Something you seem to have forgotten how to offer." Vanessa's face twisted, fury simmering beneath her perfect exterior. "So you're defending her now? The nanny?" Christopher didn't answer immediately. He thought of Elena's quiet strength, her unwavering care, the way she had mended more than just paper that afternoon. His silence said more than words ever could. Vanessa's laugh was brittle, desperate. "You'll regret this, Christopher. I won't be made a fool of." But Christopher only stood taller, his decision solidifying like stone. Whatever came next, there was no going back. Elena, who had quietly retreated to the kitchen with a glass of water, overheard the sharp tones echoing through the hall. She didn't intend to listen, but the truth unfolded itself to her anyway, and in that moment, she realized the storm had only just begun. The sun had already begun its slow descent over the sprawling Blackwood estate when the last of the society brunch guests departed. The wide marble steps that had once been a place of laughter now echoed with the silence of a fractured household. Christopher stood by the tall glass windows in his study, his reflection a blur against the fading sky. He had spent the entire afternoon replaying the brunch in his mind. The sharpness in Vanessa's tone, The way she had treated Elena as if she were invisible. And worst of all, the way Lila's small voice had cracked when she told the truth about her drawing. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The questions that had lingered for weeks were no longer shadows. They were sharp, undeniable realities gnawing at him with every tick of the ornate clock on the mantel. Vanessa entered the study with the confident clack of her heels on the polished floor. She was still in her designer brunch dress, her diamond earrings catching the last rays of light, as if she had no intention of apologizing or softening herself. Her chin was lifted, her posture defiant. "I suppose you're brooding again," she said coolly, tossing her silk clutch onto the leather chair. "You've been sulking since brunch. Honestly, Christopher, I don't know how you expect to survive in society if you let every little moment rattle you." Christopher turned sharply, his jaw tense. "A little moment? You mocked Elena in front of everyone. You humiliated her. You humiliated Lila. Do you have any idea what that did to my daughter?" Vanessa gave a careless laugh, the sound brittle. "Your daughter is a child. Children cry over everything. She'll forget it by tomorrow. You're overreacting as usual." "No, Vanessa," he said firmly, stepping closer. "I am not overreacting. You crossed a line. You don't just dismiss Lila's feelings. She's not some ornament you can scold into silence. She's my daughter, and she deserves to feel safe, respected, and loved." Avia's eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment the glamour fell away, revealing the sharpness beneath. "Loved? Christopher, what Lila needs is discipline. What she needs is to understand the world she's growing up in. That Nanny has been filling her head with nonsense about fairy tale families and happy afters. It's pathetic. Do you really want your daughter growing up thinking life is all crayons and bedtime stories? She needs strength, not sentiment." Christopher's chest tightened. Every word she spoke sounded like ice pressing down on him. Strength does not mean cruelty, and discipline does not mean ripping up the only picture she drew of what happiness looks like. That drawing meant everything to her, and you tore it apart. Vanessa rolled her eyes, unbothered. "Christopher, please, it was just paper. Honestly, you're making far too much of this. The people at that table didn't even care. They were laughing at the absurdity of it. You need to think about appearances, about status, about what marrying me means for your name, for your company, for the world you're building. Do you really want to throw all of that away because your nanny and your child had a tantrum?" His hands clenched at his sides. There it was, the truth he had been trying to ignore for months. Vanessa didn't care about him. She didn't care about Lila. She cared about power, wealth, and status. To her, marriage was a contract of convenience, not love. And for the first time, Christopher realized he couldn't live with that. Outside the study, Elena stood, frozen in the hallway. She had come only to return a stack of folded laundry she had pressed carefully for Lila. But the sharp rise in Christopher's voice had made her pause. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, yet now she stood with her heart in her throat, listening to words she was never supposed to hear. She heard Vanessa's sharp laugh again, followed by her cold reply. "Christopher, you have to stop pretending feelings matter more than reputation. Love doesn't pay for mansions, compassion doesn't get you invited to galas. Appearances are everything in this world, and I'm the only one who can give you that. Not Elena, not your precious nanny, me." Anne's breath caught. Her name said like a weapon. She pressed her back against the wall, torn between fleeing and staying. Every part of her screamed that she shouldn't be hearing this, that it wasn't her place. Yet her feet refused to move, the truth wrapped around her, suffocating. She hadn't wanted to come between Christopher and Vanessa, hadn't wanted to cause any trouble, but trouble seemed to follow her no matter how quietly she tried to live. Inside the study, Christopher's voice broke through, raw and low. "You don't understand, Vanessa. You never have. Elena doesn't pretend to care. She actually cares. She's patient with Lila, she listens. She loves in ways you wouldn't even recognize." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's heels clicked as she turned away, but her voice remained sharp. "So what, Christopher? Are you falling for her now? Is that it? Have you really sunk so low as to trade me for some nobody nanny? Because if that's what you're thinking, then you are more naive than I thought." Elena felt her stomach twist. Her eyes burned, though she didn't know if it was shame, fear, or something else entirely. She pressed a hand to her chest, steadying her breath. The last thing she wanted was to be the reason Christopher's engagement fell apart. And yet, deep inside, she couldn't deny the way her heart thudded when he spoke of her kindness, when he noticed the little things she did for Lila. It was dangerous, it was forbidden, and still it was real. Christopher inhaled deeply, steadying himself. This isn't about Elena. This is about you. About what you've shown me today, and what I can no longer ignore. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms. Oh, please, Christopher, don't get self-righteous now. You knew who I was when you proposed. You wanted the glamour, the connections, the status. You knew exactly what you were getting. If you think you're suddenly too noble for this arrangement, then maybe you're the one who has changed. Her words struck him, but instead of anger, he felt something else rise within him. Clarity. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he had been blind for too long, convincing himself that marrying Vanessa was the practical choice, the safe choice. But watching her tear apart Lila's world with a single, cruel gesture had opened his eyes. Safe didn't mean happy, practical didn't mean right. His gaze hardened, his voice steady as steel. You're right, I did know who you were, but I thought there was more to you than this. I thought you had some shred of compassion. I was wrong. Vanessa's face flushed with indignation, but before she could reply, Christopher turned away, his decision already beginning to crystallize in the quiet corners of his mind. He didn't know exactly what the next step would be, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had broken tonight, and it could not be repaired. And outside in the hall, Elena slipped away quietly, the weight of his words heavy on her heart. Christopher stayed in his office for a long time after Vanessa left, the echoes of their argument reverberating inside him like a relentless drum. He poured himself a drink but barely touched it, his hand resting on the glass as his eyes traced the shelves lined with awards and photographs, images of a carefully curated life, one where appearances had always been prized above substance. Yet none of it felt like it mattered now. His daughter's tears, Elena's quiet heartbreak, the way Vanessa had smirked when confronted, those images drowned out the polished veneer he had built. For the first time in years, he wondered if he had been living for the wrong things. The door opened softly, almost hesitant, and he turned to find Elena standing there. She froze when she saw him, clearly unsure if she should have come. He rose slowly, placing the untouched glass aside, and gestured for her to enter. She stepped in, her hands clasped nervously in front of her, her eyes downcast. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I didn't mean to cause more trouble for you. He stared at her, incredulous. You? Trouble? Elena, none of this is your fault. Her eyes lifted then, wide and vulnerable, brimming with emotions she seemed desperate to hide. I've been thinking maybe it's better if I leave. Vanessa is right in one way. I don't belong in your world. Lila will be heartbroken, but children adapt. I can find work elsewhere. The words struck him like a physical blow. Leave? The thought of his daughter waking up without Elena's gentle presence, of coming home to a house void of her quiet laughter, of her absence filling every room like a shadow, he couldn't bear it. He said firmly, more forcefully than he intended, Elena, don't even think about leaving. She looked startled, taking a small step back. But Christopher? He closed the distance between them, his voice low but urgent. Do you know what I saw tonight? I saw the woman I thought I wanted to marry sneer at kindness, dismiss my daughter's tears, and treat you like you're less than human. And then I saw you, holding yourself together with dignity, comforting Lila even when you were hurting yourself. If anyone belongs here, Elena, it's you. Not. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Her throat worked as she tried to swallow back tears, her composure faltering. She shook her head. Christopher, please, don't say things like that. I'm just the nanny. If anyone heard... Here's he cut in, his voice cracked, raw with honesty. For too long, I've cared about appearances, about status, about what the world expects from me. But when I saw Lila cry tonight, when I saw you suffer in silence, I realized something. I've been blind, Elena, blind to what truly matters. Her breath caught. And what matters? He stepped closer, so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him, the intensity in his eyes anchoring her in place. You, my daughter's happiness, the quiet grace you bring into this home every day. That's what matters. She trembled, her heart pounding in her chest so hard she thought it might break her ribs. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to believe him, to let the words settle deep where hope had always been too dangerous to nurture. But reality surged back, cruel and unrelenting. "You don't mean that," she whispered, though her voice betrayed the longing in her. "You're hurt, confused after the fight. Tomorrow you'll regret saying it." He reached out then, his hand hovering just inches from her cheek, hesitant but yearning. "No, Elena, if I regret anything, it's that I didn't see the truth sooner." A tear slipped down her cheek, and his hand finally touched her, brushing it away with a tenderness that unraveled her defenses. She closed her eyes for a moment, overwhelmed by the storm inside her. When she opened them again, he was still there, his gaze unwavering. "Shouldn't be here," she murmured, though she didn't step back. "This isn't right." "What isn't right," he said softly, "is pretending that Vanessa is the woman I should spend my life with when every part of me recoils at the thought. What isn't right is letting my daughter grow up thinking love is cold and conditional. Elena, I don't know what this means yet or where it leads, but I know I can't ignore it anymore." She shook her head, torn between the gravity of his words and the fear of what they implied. "If people knew, they would judge you, they would judge me." He gave a sad smile. "Let them. For once, I'd rather be judged for doing what's right than praised for living a lie." The silence stretched between them, charged and fragile. Then the sound of small footsteps in the hallway shattered it. Lila appeared at the doorway, her eyes puffy from crying but still searching for comfort. She saw Elena first and ran to her, clinging tightly around her waist. Elena dropped to her knees, hugging the little girl fiercely, as though the world could collapse and she would still hold on. Christopher watched them, something inside him solidifying, unshakable. Vanessa could sneer about appearances all she wanted, but here, in this moment, he saw everything clearly. The family that already existed before his eyes, built not on wealth or status, but on love. Later that night, as the household quieted, Elena lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. Christopher's words replayed in her mind, both a balm and a torment. She wanted to believe him, wanted to cling to the possibility that he truly saw her, but fear pressed heavily against her chest. She had lived too long another place, too long afraid of crossing invisible lines. Still, one truth lingered with undeniable clarity. Vanessa's cruelty had stripped away the illusions. Christopher was not blind anymore. He had seen the contrast between them, and Elena knew, deep down, that something had shifted permanently. Christopher, meanwhile, sat by the window in his study, unable to sleep. His thoughts circled relentlessly. Vanessa's smirk, Elena's tears, Lila's broken sobs. He had wealth, influence, everything the world said should make a man powerful. Yet he felt powerless because none of it mattered if he couldn't protect the people who truly gave his life meaning. He knew tomorrow would bring decisions, hard and irreversible. But tonight, as he stared out into the darkness, he knew this much with certainty. His engagement was hanging by a thread, and his heart was already gone. The ballroom glittered under the glow of chandeliers, a perfect stage for wealth, elegance, and the spectacle of appearances. Vanessa had spared no expense for the engagement dinner. The tables gleamed with crystal glasses and imported silverware. Floral centerpieces rose like towers of ivory and gold, and the music was played by a string quartet hired from Vienna. Guests whispered in admiration, not only at the extravagance but also at the ambition. This was not just an engagement dinner. It was Vanessa's coronation as the future Mrs. Christopher Hale, cementing her status among the city's elite. Christopher moved through the crowd like a shadow in his own life. He wore a tailored suit, his every gesture polished, yet his mind was far from the gleam of wealth around him. Since the confrontation with Vanessa, a storm had brewed inside him. He replayed the image of Elena mending the torn drawing, Lila's small arms wrapped around her nanny, as if she were the safest. Then, he contrasted that image with Vanessa's laughter, sharp as broken glass, dismissing his daughter's tears as childish nonsense. The two women represented opposite worlds, and for the first time, Christopher questioned which one belonged in his future. At the head of the room, Vanessa basked in attention. Her gown shimmered with sequins that caught the light, each sparkle a calculated strike against anyone daring to compare themselves to her. She paraded her diamond ring, offered sharp smiles, and leaned in close to whisper things that made the women around her feel both drawn and diminished. She thrived on envy. She wanted Elena to shrink into the wallpaper for Elena had come only because Lila begged her to. The little girl was excited to see her father celebrate, and she refused to go without her beloved Nanny at her side. Elena had dressed simply, in a modest navy dress that Lila had chosen. Standing near the edge of the room, she tried to remain invisible, her hands folded tightly. But Vanessa noticed her. Of course she noticed. As the dinner progressed, Vanessa found opportunity after opportunity to jab at Elena. At one point, she raised her champagne glass, eyes glinting with cruel amusement. "You know," she said, loudly enough for several tables to hear, "when I first met Christopher, I thought he must have been terribly lonely. It takes a very big heart to adopt a stray. And I'm not talking about the dog he rescued last year. It's sweet, really, how he extends charity even to his staff." A ripple of laughter rose from those eager to stay in her favor, though some guests looked uneasy. Elena lowered her eyes, her cheeks burning. Christopher clenched his jaw, his knuckles whitening around his fork. He opened his mouth to speak, but stopped himself, unwilling to make a scene. At least not yet. Vanessa continued as though nothing were wrong. "Children get so attached to their caretakers, but let's be honest, it's unhealthy. Nannies come and go, and they should know not to linger in the family portrait. Don't you agree?" Words were poisoned honey, disguised as conversation. Elena held her composure, though her heart pounded. Lila, seated beside her father, frowned deeply, her small hands curling into fists. It was then that Christopher made his decision. His eyes scanned the room, the glitter, the opulence, the shallow smiles of those who applauded cruelty as entertainment. And he thought of Lila's drawing, torn once, but repaired. Tonight, he would not allow that drawing, that dream, to be torn again. The dinner reached its crescendo when Vanessa insisted on making a toast. She stood at the front, her smile dazzling, her voice dripping with rehearsed charm. "To the future," she declared, raising her glass. "To Christopher, who chose me not just because I am beautiful, but because together we will be unstoppable. Wealth, power, influence, we are the picture of what every couple should aspire to. And to his sweet little girl, who will grow up knowing what it means to be part of true society." She gestured toward Lila with a benevolent hand, as though bestowing charity upon a beggar. Lila shrank against her father, her eyes filling with tears. Christopher stood, abruptly. The scrape of his chair against the floor silenced the room. Every head turned as he walked toward the stage where Vanessa stood, confusion flickering across her face. "Turn," he said, taking the microphone from her hand. His voice was calm but resonant, carrying weight through the room. He looked at the guests, then at Vanessa, then finally at Elena, who stood, frozen near the back. "I've listened to enough tonight," Christopher began. "Enough pretense, enough cruelty disguised as wit, enough arrogance. I thought this dinner was to celebrate love, but all I hear is contempt. Contempt for my daughter, contempt for the woman who has been her anchor, and contempt for everything I hold dear." The air tightened, as though the chandeliers themselves leaned in to listen. "I will not marry a woman who mocks the tears of a child. I will not marry someone who belittles kindness as weakness, and I will not marry anyone who dares to insult the woman who brought light back into my daughter's life." Gasps erupted across the ballroom. Murmurs followed like crashing waves. Vanessa's face twisted, her mask cracking in front of everyone. "You can't be serious," she hissed, grabbing the microphone back. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone. This is our engagement dinner." Christopher's voice was firm. "No, it was, but it ends now. The engagement is over." The ballroom broke into chaos, shocked whispers, raised phones capturing the moment, cameras flashing. Vanessa's fury blazed. She turned toward Elena, eyes narrowed into daggers. "This is her fault," Vanessa shouted. "She's been whispering in your daughter's ear, making herself indispensable, pretending she's family when she's nothing but the help. She's stolen you from me." Elena stepped back, as though struck, her breath catching in her throat. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some pitying, others judgmental. She wanted to vanish, to shield Lila from the ugliness spilling into the air. Christopher moved quickly, stepping between Vanessa and Elena. His presence was a wall, his expression unyielding. "Enough," he said sharply. "Elena has stolen nothing. She has given. She gave Lila hope when grief stole it from her. She gave comfort when you gave cruelty. If anyone here doubts her worth, they will answer to me." Elena's chest tightened, torn between gratitude and fear. To be defended so openly was more than she had ever imagined, yet the weight of the moment crushed her. She worried what would come next, the gossip, the rumors, the fallout. Relief and dread coiled together inside her heart. Vanessa, trembling with rage, hurled her champagne glass to the floor. The crystal shattered, echoing through the silence. "You'll regret this, Christopher. You'll regret throwing me away for her." But Christopher did not flinch. He simply turned back to the guests, his voice steady. "The engagement is over. Please enjoy the evening if you wish, but Vanessa and I are finished." The declaration hung in the air like a final bell. Christopher stood, frozen in the middle of the ballroom, the microphone still in his hand. Vanessa's words had cut through the crowd like shards of glass, her shrill voice accusing Elena of being a thief of affection, a manipulator hiding behind a nanny's apron. But instead of doubting, Christopher saw the truth more clearly than ever. The expressions on the faces around him told their own story. Some guests stared in horror, others whispered furiously, and a few even glanced toward Elena with pity rather than scorn. The mask Vanessa had so carefully constructed was crumbling, and she did not even realize it. Vanessa jabbed a manicured finger in Elena's direction. "Look at her, standing there, pretending to be innocent. She's been planting herself in this family, making your daughter depend on her, twisting you against me. Do you think no one notices?" Her voice trembled, not with vulnerability, but with rage, fueled by the humiliation of being contradicted in public. Elena's face burned. She wanted desperately to disappear, to melt into the shadows at the edge of the glittering room, but she could not move. Christopher lowered the microphone slowly, then handed it to the nearest waiter. The sudden quiet that filled the room was thick and heavy, as though the entire city had paused to watch what he would do next. He walked deliberately across the floor toward Elena and his daughter, his tall frame steady, his expression unreadable. The hush grew even deeper, the crowd parting instinctively to let him through. Elena expected him to return to her side. She waited, arms folded, certain that once he approached her, he would reclaim control and reassure the guests. But Christopher did not even glance at her. Instead, he knelt down beside Lila, gently brushing back her hair. "It's all right, sweetheart," he murmured. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. No one is going to hurt you or your dreams again." His words were quiet, but they carried every syllable filled with warmth and conviction. When he stood, his gaze lifted to Elena. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time itself seemed to halt. Elena shook her head slightly, almost pleading with him not to say more, not to expose himself to further scandal. But Christopher's resolve was iron. He reached out, placed his hand protectively on Elena's shoulder, and finally turned to face Vanessa. "Accuse her of stealing," he said, his voice calm yet resonant enough to carry across the hall. "But tell me, Vanessa, what exactly has she stolen? My money, my name, my pride? No. She has only given. She gave my daughter joy when grief had silenced her. She gave my home warmth when it had grown cold. She gave me a glimpse of the family I thought I could never have again. If that is theft, then I am grateful to be robbed." A ripple of astonishment coursed through the guests. Gasps mingled with hushed exclamations. A society columnist near the back scribbled furiously in her notebook, sensing that tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. Anissa's face twisted, her composure cracking. "You'll regret this, Christopher. Throwing away everything we built for her, for some nobody who polishes silverware and wipes your daughter's nose. You think the board will respect you? You think society will welcome a scandal like this?" Christopher straightened, his presence towering, unshakable. "Respect that is bought by cruelty is not worth having. And a marriage built on vanity and disdain will collapse long before the ink dries on the license. You may value appearances, Vanessa. I value truth. And the truth is that this engagement is over." The ballroom erupted. Some guests whispered eagerly, others stood to leave, scandalized, while a few applauded quietly under their breath, impressed by his courage. Camera flashes burst from every corner, documenting the downfall of the city's most anticipated wedding before it even began. Vanessa's voice rose again, shrill and venomous. And what about her? What happens when she tires of playing nanny and starts demanding more? When she ruins your reputation with her clumsy ways? Elena flinched, but Christopher did not falter. Elena has never asked me for anything. That's what separates her from you. She gives without expecting, and that makes her richer in spirit than anyone in this room. He paused, sweeping his gaze across the guests. If you cannot understand that, perhaps you are poorer than she will ever be. The weight of his words silenced Vanessa at last. Her lips trembled, but no reply came. In a final act of fury, she seized the diamond ring from her finger, hurled it onto the marble floor, and stormed out of the hall. The heavy doors slammed behind her, the echo reverberating like the final strike of a gavel sealing judgment. For a long moment, no one moved. Elena felt her chest tighten, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. Relief that Vanessa's cruelty had been cut short, fear of the storm that would surely follow, and a fragile, trembling hope that she dared not put into words. Lila clutched her tightly, whispering, "He chose us, Lena, he chose us." Christopher turned once more to Elena, his expression softening. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't let her tear apart the two people who matter most. His voice faltered slightly, as if the weight of his admission surprised even him. I don't know what the future holds, Elena, but I know it cannot include someone who despises kindness. The guests, sensing the intimacy of the moment, slowly began to drift away, murmuring, speculating, already rehearsing the stories they would share at tomorrow's gatherings. Some were scandalized, others secretly thrilled to have witnessed the drama firsthand. But none could deny the truth of what they had seen. A man of immense wealth and influence choosing principle over convenience, choosing sincerity over pretense. When the last of the curious onlookers had departed, the three of them, Christopher, Elena, and Lila, remained standing together beneath the crystal chandeliers. The shattered silence of the engagement dinner hung like fragile glass between them, reflecting both an ending and a beginning. Elena opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Christopher simply reached for his daughter's hand, then extended the other to Elena. Hesitant, trembling, she placed her hand in his. And in that quiet gesture, something unspoken yet undeniable was sealed. The world outside would soon erupt with gossip, judgment, and speculation. But in that suspended moment, under the glow of fading lights, the three of them stood as something closer to a family than they had ever been before. And though Elena's heart still raced with uncertainty, she felt, for the first time in years, that perhaps broken dreams could be mended, just as surely as a torn drawing taped back together with care. The morning after the engagement dinner felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Newspapers lay scattered across the breakfast table, their glossy covers blaring headlines that made Elena's stomach twist. Business titans, engagement in shocking scene. Christopher Hale chooses Nanny over heiress. Love scandal, power, pride, and the help. Each article carried a different version of the truth, but all of them shared one thing. Her name, or at least the title that now branded her in society's eyes. The nanny. The girl who ruined a perfect society match. The charity case who dared to stand between wealth and power. Elena sat rigid in the small staff kitchen, her tea untouched, as voices echoed from the hall upstairs. Christopher's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Lila, mercifully, still slept, unaware of the frenzy unraveling just beyond her fairy tale bubble. "Have you seen these?" murmured Marie, the housekeeper, sliding one of the tabloids across the table. Elena barely glanced at it, but the bold black letters still burned. "Is this the woman who stole his heart?" Her cheeks flamed. She shoved the paper aside. "I didn't steal anything." Marie's gaze softened. "Of course not, but the world doesn't care about truth, only spectacle." And spectacle was exactly what Vanessa thrived on. By midday, social media swarmed with carefully framed photographs of her leaving her penthouse in tears, designer sunglasses shading her eyes, reporters clamoring as she wailed about betrayal. Elena knew this wasn't the end. Vanessa was wounded, and a woman like her would strike back twice as hard. For Christopher, yes, but mostly for her. That afternoon, Elena sat alone in the nursery, folding tiny dresses Lila had outgrown. Her heart felt heavy with the decision she had tried to ignore for days. Each laugh she had shared with Lila, each stolen moment of warmth with Christopher, each fragile step into a life she had never believed she could belong to, they all weighed down on her now. She couldn't stay. Not with every camera aimed at her, not with Vanessa's venom spreading, not with whispers that she was using Christopher for wealth and status. She wasn't blind. She had heard the staff in the market, the drivers at the gate. To them, she was a story, not a woman. And Christopher, he had a business empire to protect. His reputation mattered in ways hers never could. If she stayed, she would drag him down with her. Her hands trembled as she reached for the small suitcase tucked at the back of her closet. She began to pack in silence, slipping folded blouses, worn shoes, and a little tin box of keepsakes inside. She didn't notice the tears until they blurred her vision, dripping onto the soft fabric she held. A small voice startled her. "Where are you going?" Lila stood in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her wide eyes brimmed with confusion, then fear. "You can't leave. You promised." Elena's throat closed. She knelt quickly, gathering the girl into her arms. "Sweetheart, I'm not leaving you because I want to, but sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices." Lila pulled back, shaking her head fiercely. "No. You're part of our family now. Daddy said you made us smile again. If you go, who will tuck me in? Who will fix my drawings? Who will—" Her voice cracked, breaking into sobs that tore through Elena's chest. She rocked the little girl, whispering soothing words she didn't believe herself. "I will always love you, Lila, no matter where I am." But Lila clung tighter, as if holding on could anchor her in place. "Tell Daddy. He won't let you go. He won't?" Helen's lips trembled. She wanted to believe that, but doubts gnawed at her heart. Christopher cared? Yes, but enough to defy the world? Enough to bear the storms that would follow? She didn't know. By evening, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing the turmoil within her. Elena stepped outside into the garden, suitcase by her side. The air was thick, heavy with the promise of rain. She wanted to leave quietly, without goodbyes, without forcing Christopher into a corner. But fate had other plans. She heard the footsteps first, quick and purposeful, crunching against the gravel path. Then his voice, sharp and desperate. "Elena." She froze. Slowly she turned. Christopher stood there, hair windswept, his shirt clinging to him from the rising humidity. His eyes were a storm of their own, searching, demanding answers. "You were going to leave without telling me?" Her lips parted, but no words came. The suitcase by her side betrayed everything. "Elena." His voice cracked, stripped of the composure he carried in boardrooms and headlines. "Why?" Her chest ached. She drew a shaky breath. "Because staying will destroy you. Don't you see? They're already painting me as the villain. Vanessa, the press, society. They'll never stop. And you," her voice broke, "you deserve someone who won't pull you down into this mess." Thunder rumbled overhead. He stepped closer, rain beginning to speckle the gravel between them. "You think I care about them?" "You should," she whispered. His words cut through the air. "For years, I cared about appearances, about deals and mergers and headlines. And what did it bring me? Loneliness, emptiness. A daughter who smiled less and less until you walked into her life." Her tears blurred him, but his words pierced through every fear. "Elena, you gave me back my family, not by pretending, not by flaunting wealth, but by being yourself. Do you really think I would trade that for the approval of strangers?" She shook her head, backing away as the rain began to pour. "Christopher, I don't belong in your world. I'm just—" "Don't," he said fiercely. "Don't diminish yourself. You are the only person who has ever made me believe again. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be real, and that's all I want." Her sob broke free, mingling with the rain. She wanted to believe him, but years of insecurity clawed at her chest. "I'm so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid I'll never be enough." He closed the distance between them, his hand cupping her face with a gentleness that steadied her trembling heart. You're already enough, more than enough. The storm crashed overhead, rain soaking them both, but neither moved. His eyes held hers, unwavering, and in that moment, every wall she had built crumbled. When his lips met hers, the world seemed to still. The kiss was fierce, desperate, full of every unsaid word. She clung to him, surrendering to the truth she had tried to deny. From the nursery window above, a small face pressed against the glass. Lila watched, her tears forgotten, replaced by a smile as bright as lightning itself. For the first time, her dream didn't feel like just a drawing. It felt real. Rain softened the garden into silhouettes, the stone path a ribbon of light. Christopher didn't release her. He framed Elena's face as though every raindrop were a vow. When they parted, she steadied against his chest, feeling his heartbeat match hers. "I'm still afraid," she said. "Tomorrow will be brutal. The headlines, the whispers, Vanessa's fury." "Tomorrow can be loud," he replied, brushing her jaw. "Tonight, let truth be louder. I choose you. I choose what you bring to this home." He took the suitcase from her and set it beneath the eaves. "You're not leaving, not because of them." Her mouth trembled. "What if I fall, Christopher? What if I make 1,000 mistakes?" "Then we stand you up 1,001 times," he said. "You already do that for Lila. Let me do it for you." The window above creaked, and Lila's voice floated down through the rain. "Elena, Daddy, are you okay?" "We're okay, sweetheart," Elena called. "Wait by the stairs, we're coming in." They crossed the patio together, dripping and breathless. In the mudroom, Marie thrust towels into their hands. "About time the sky washed this place," she murmured, ushering them toward the kitchen. Lila met them on the last step, rabbit tucked under her arm. She looked from one to the other, searching for retreat and finding steadiness instead. "You're not leaving," she said, half plea, half announcement. "In mind," Elena answered, kneeling. "If your father still wants me here." "I do," Christopher said. Lila launched herself at them both, a laughing tangle of damp pajamas and relief. For a suspended moment, the storm hushed against the windows. They settled in the kitchen, where the lights were soft and the kettle hissed kindly. Elena's suitcase sat by the back door like a choice set aside. Christopher warmed honeyed milk while Elena combed rain from Lila's hair. The ordinary felt like a miracle. "I don't want the mean people to talk about you," Lila said, drowsy. "We can lock the gates and not let them in." "We can't lock the world out forever," Elena replied. "But we can be brave together." Christopher met Elena's gaze over the rim of the mug. "Tomorrow I'll make a statement. Not to feed the scandal, but to protect you. To protect us. To be attacked for it," she whispered. "You've been attacked for less noble things," he said. "If I'm judged, let it be for choosing the right people." Lila fought sleep long enough to hear that. "We're the right people," she declared, then sagged into Elena's side. Christopher carried her to bed. Elena tucked the rabbit beneath her arm and smoothed the sheet with the care that had stitched their lives together. The repaired drawing waited in its frame. The house, which had held its breath for days, seemed to exhale. In the hallway, Elena paused. "What if this is too much?" she whispered. "For you, for her, for me." He leaned against the door jamb, rain still beating on his collar. "It will be hard," he said, "but loneliness was harder. I'd rather face storms with you than blue skies without you." They moved to the library, where the fire snapped softly, casting amber along the rows of books. The storm thinned to a fine rain, a shimmer behind the glass. Elena held a towel around her shoulders, suddenly shy. "When you said I gave you back a family," she began, "I wanted to tell you something." He waited, offering silence like a chair. "I've never belonged anywhere," she said. "Every room felt rented by the hour. With Lila, I stopped counting minutes. With you, I stopped counting fears. But I don't know how to be what people expect." "I'm not asking you to be what people expect," he said. "Be the woman who hums lullabies, tapes torn dreams, and makes hot chocolate not too sweet." "That's the woman I felt." He caught the word, then let it stand. "Fell for." The confession bloomed like a slow sunrise. Elena closed her eyes, steadying. "I love your daughter," she said, "like she were mine. And you," her breath hitched, You scare me because I could love you the same way. No halvesy." He drew her into his arms. "Then let's be brave enough to love whole." She laughed, a shaky, luminous sound that warmed the room more than the fire. "Promise you won't ask me to be perfect?" "I promise. I want truth. I want the you who misses a stare and laughs, who says the wrong thing when she's nervous, who cries when a child calls her mama for the first." She looked up, eyes bright. "And what do I give you in return?" "Your hand when I'm stubborn," he said. "Your voice when I forget to listen. Your refusal to let me hide behind the size of my house." A clock chimed, her towel slipped, he caught it before it fell, the simple gesture warmer than any diamond. "Stay," he said, "not as a secret, as part of us." She nodded, slowly at first, then with certainty. "I'll stay." They returned to the kitchen to fetch her suitcase. Christopher lifted it, then paused. "There's a different place for this now," he said, and carried it upstairs, past the nursery where Lila slept, to a room with a window over the garden. He set the suitcase on the bench and stepped back, offering the room like an invitation. Elena stood in the doorway, fingers pressed to her mouth. It wasn't grand, just light and quiet and a view of the cherry tree she and Lila had watched bloom. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's yours," he answered, "if you want it." She opened the window. Cool air slid in, smelling of rain and earth. The garden glistened below like a promise kept. She wrapped her arms around him and rested her cheek against his heart. "I want it." Downstairs, Marie switched off the last lights and smiled to herself. Outside, reporters would return, headlines would multiply, and Vanessa would keep throwing stones. But inside these walls, something stronger than rumor had taken root. When they finally parted for sleep, Christopher walked her back to the nursery. They stood together, watching Lila dream. Elena traced the frame of the drawing with one fingertip. "We'll make a new one," she whispered. "One that never needs tape." Christopher's hand found hers. "We already are." They didn't kiss again that night. They didn't need to. The house had heard their promise, the rain had sealed it, and the quiet carried it safely into morning. The fallout from the canceled engagement swept through the city like a storm no one could contain. The newspapers printed bold headlines with words meant to sting. "Tycoon casts off socialite, bride. Heir gives up his queen for a servant." Christopher Hale's shocking choice. Photographers camped outside the gates of the Hale estate, waiting for a glimpse of scandal. Every camera lens sought Elena, the nanny they now painted as the villain in Vanessa's downfall. Inside the mansion, however, the story unfolded differently. Elena carried on with quiet grace, still preparing Lila's breakfast, still walking with her in the gardens, still reading fairy tales by the fire. She ignored the tabloids scattered across newsstands and the whispers she could hear even from vendors in town. But behind her calm eyes, she felt the weight of society's cruelty pressing harder with each passing day. Christopher tried to shield her, limiting his appearances in public, sending his aides to deal with business functions, but there were obligations he couldn't avoid. At every gathering, the stares pierced like knives, the laughter laced with ridicule. Old acquaintances asked him, with false concern, if he had lost his sense of proportion. Some boldly suggested he could still reconcile with Vanessa and salvage his image. Christopher listened politely, but responded with steady conviction. "My daughter deserves a home where kindness matters more than reputation," he said once at a gala, his voice carrying across the glittering hall. "And I deserve to live beside someone who reminds me what family feels like." That answer, reported in magazines, spread even faster than the gossip. It divided the public. Some mocked him for weakness, but others quietly admired the courage it took to defend. Elena read those words in print, her hands trembling slightly. They were words she never imagined someone of his stature would say on her behalf. Yet the world outside was unforgiving. On errands in the city, she heard murmurs. "Isn't that the nanny? She trapped him, you know." Sometimes strangers stared openly, as if trying to measure her worth against Vanessa's beauty and pedigree. Elena met those eyes with dignity, refusing to bow to shame. Still, nights were difficult. Alone in her room, she wondered if Christopher had sacrificed too much for her presence. The mansion had become warmer since Vanessa's absence, filled with laughter when Lila painted with Elena or insisted on baking together, leaving flour everywhere. But Elena couldn't shake the fear that society's sneers might one day harden into something Christopher regretted. One evening, as a storm rolled across the horizon, Elena stood on the balcony outside her room, the wind catching strands of her hair. She whispered into the darkness, "I never asked for this. I only wanted to care for Lila." Her heart tightened because deep down she knew it was no longer just about caring for the little girl. Her love for Christopher had rooted too deeply to deny. The following week, Christopher hosted a small charity dinner at the estate. Instead of sending Elena away, as Vanessa would have demanded, he introduced her openly to the guests. "This is Elena," he said firmly, his hand at the small of her back. "She is part of this household, part of my family." The words drew a gasp from the crowd. Some smiled in polite approval, but others exchanged sharp glances. Elena held her composure, bowing her head slightly to the guests. Later, in the kitchen, the staff whispered their relief. "He finally said it," one maid murmured. "No more shadows. He's proud of her." Elena bit her lip, feeling both overwhelmed and humbled. She had not realized how much she needed to hear Christopher claim her place aloud. But the most unexpected moment came a few nights later. Lila had been tucked into bed, her hair still damp from her bath, her favorite stuffed rabbit in her arms. Elena leaned over to kiss her forehead, whispering, "Sweet dreams, my darling." As she turned to go, Lila's small voice, "Mama?" Elena froze. Slowly she turned back. Lila's wide eyes shone with innocence, yet filled with certainty. "You're my mama," the child said, hugging the rabbit close. The world tilted for Elena. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart lurch. Tears stung her eyes, spilling despite her effort to hold them back. She sat on the edge of the bed, gathering Lila into her arms. "I love you as if I were," she whispered, voice breaking. Christopher, standing quietly in the doorway, heard every word. He had come to say goodnight, but remained rooted, his breath caught in his throat. When Lila repeated softly, "Mama," his vision blurred with tears he had not shed in years. Later, when the house was silent, he found Elena in the kitchen, staring at a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Without speaking, he walked to her and took her trembling hands. "Did you hear her?" she whispered. "I did," he said, his voice raw, "and I've never heard anything more right in my life." At that moment, the ridicule of society, the cold glances of former friends, the slanderous headlines, all of it seemed powerless compared to the single word uttered by his daughter. It was not scandal. It was truth. The days that followed were no easier in the public eye, but inside the Hale estate, a transformation began. Where once corridors echoed with Vanessa's criticisms and the chill of formality, now there was music, Lila humming as Elena braided her hair, Christopher's laughter when Flower dusted his tailored suit during another kitchen adventure. The mansion felt less like a fortress and more like a home. Yet society did not forget. At luncheons, Elena was called the imposter in silk. Magazines ran cruel comparisons between her modest dresses and Vanessa's couture gowns. Some accused her of being an opportunist, others of having ensnared Christopher with pity. Elena bore it all with silent strength, never retaliating, never lowering herself to their level. One afternoon, as Christopher prepared for a board meeting, he found Elena in the library, shelving books. She looked up as he entered, her eyes clouded. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Regret what?" "Choosing me, standing against everyone else. I don't want you to lose the respect you've worked for all your life because of me." He stepped closer, lifting her chin with a gentle hand. "Elena, respect built on fear of others' opinions isn't worth keeping. What I've found with you, what Lila found, is real, and I will never regret that." His tone left no space. Her breath caught and she nodded, though tears glimmered in her eyes. In her heart she still felt unworthy of such loyalty, yet the warmth in his gaze steadied her. The mansion staff too began to reflect the change. Once formal and distant, they grew fond of Elena's kindness. She treated them not as servants but as people, remembering their birthdays, listening when one confided worries about a sick child. They in turn whispered admiration. One evening, Christopher invited a small circle of trusted colleagues for dinner. The whispers started immediately, many expecting Elena to hide away. Instead, she entered with quiet poise, helping serve and later joining Christopher at his side. A guest, emboldened by wine, muttered, "Surely you'll come to your senses, Christopher. A nanny cannot stand in the place of a wife." The room tensed. Christopher rose slowly, his voice calm but firm. "A wife is not measured by her title or her wardrobe. She is measured by the love she gives, by the home she creates, by the heart she shares. By that measure, Elena already stands above anyone else." Silence followed, heavy and thick, before another guest raised his glass and Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to protest, to remind him she was not his wife, but the fire in his words silenced her. That night, as she walked Lila to her room, the child wrapped small arms around her neck and whispered again, "Good night, Mama." Christopher stood in the hall, watching, his eyes wet once more. He had never known such peace, such unshakable truth in the chaos of wealth and power. But not everyone accepted it. Letters arrived in the mail, some filled with warnings, others with venom. "You are ruining the Hale name. Choose wisely before you lose everything." Christopher burned them in the fireplace, refusing to let them reach Elena. Despite it all, the bond between the three of them deepened. Lila's once frequent nightmares faded. She laughed more, painted more, and clung less to fear. Christopher found himself lingering in the kitchen, just to watch Elena sing softly while stirring soup. And Elena, though still battling doubt, allowed herself to dream, even if only in stolen moments, of a life where she belonged permanently at their side. The cold mansion had become warm, not because of wealth or grandeur, but because of love. Christopher knew that, no matter what society demanded, he had already found the family he had long been searching for. And for Elena, the whispered word, "Mama," was both a gift and a promise that she was no longer just the nanny, no longer a shadow in someone else's story, but part of something larger, something unbreakable. The trials of society would continue, but within the walls of the Hale estate, love was winning. The garden glowed with the golden haze of late afternoon, a warmth that seemed to wrap the air in silk. The mansion, once a monument of silence and grief, now brimmed with a softer melody, the sound of laughter drifting from beneath the canopy of roses. Lila darted across the grass, with a crown of wildflowers on her head, her giggles ringing like wind chimes. Her small feet no longer trembled when she ran. Fear no longer shadowed her steps. She was free, unshackled from the trauma that had once bound her heart. Christopher stood a few paces away, watching with quiet awe. His suit jacket was draped over a chair, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had known wealth, power, and victories that made the world bow before him, yet nothing compared to this vision, his daughter's unguarded joy. For so long, he had feared he would never see her smile without restraint again. But here she was, radiant, blooming like the roses around her, and at the center of it all was Elena. She knelt in the grass, her dress touched by the sunlight, her hair loose and glinting with gold. She reached for Lila when the little girl stumbled, lifting her with gentle arms. Lila leaned into her, whispering something that made a laugh softly, her voice carrying across the garden like music. The sight tugged at Christopher's chest. Elena had given him back his daughter, not through medicine or miracles, but through something far rarer: patience, compassion, and unshakable love. For months, the world outside their gates had been cruel. Whispers in social clubs, headlines mocking him for abandoning a wealthy queen to choose a woman society called a servant. Yet within these walls, their world flourished. Christopher had long since stopped listening to the venom of others. He had chosen what mattered most. He had chosen the truth of his heart. But today, his resolve would take form in a way he had been planning in silence, a moment that had kept him awake countless nights. His hand slipped into his pocket, brushing the velvet box he carried there. His pulse quickened. He had spoken of love before, confessed it in storms and silence, yet words were fragile things. Today, he wanted something unbreakable. Elena glanced up and caught his gaze. For a heartbeat, it was as though the world stood still. Her smile, unadorned and uncalculated, was enough to undo him. She did not know what he carried, nor the words trembling on his lips. She only knew how to love his daughter, and through that, unknowingly, she had healed him too. Christopher took a step forward, then another, until he stood close enough to hear the softness of her breath. Lila noticed his approach and clapped her hands, bouncing in Elena's lap. He drew a deep breath to control his emotions. "Daddy, come see. Elena made me a crown." She lifted the wildflowers on her head proudly, her eyes shining like morning dew. Christopher's throat tightened. "It suits you perfectly, my star," he said, brushing her cheek. But then he dropped to one knee, not only before his daughter, but before them both. The garden seemed to hush. Even the breeze held its breath. Elena blinked, startled. "Christopher," she whispered, her hand tightening protectively around Lila, as though uncertain what he was about to say. He reached into his pocket, drawing out the small velvet box. He did not open it yet. Instead, he let his gaze rest on both of them, his daughter, his light, and the woman who had restored that light when he thought it extinguished forever. "Every empire I built, every room I entered, every victory I claimed," Christopher began, his voice low but steady, "meant nothing compared to this. To you. Elena, you gave me back my daughter's laughter, you gave me back the meaning of home. And you, Lila, you gave me the courage to hope again." Everything Eliza and Madison's end of the box, revealing a simple but exquisite ring glinting in the sunlight. "I don't want to ask Elena alone. I want to ask both of you. Will you let me be part of a family again? Will you let us build something no wealth could ever buy?" For a heartbeat, silence stretched across the garden. Then Lila's small hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her wide eyes, and she whispered in a trembling voice, "Mama, Daddy wants us to be a family." She turned to Elena, tugging at her arm, her words breaking into sobs of joy. "Mama, can we? Please?" The word "mama" fell like a miracle from Lila's lips. Elena gasped, covering her mouth as her own tears spilled freely. She had never dared to hope for this moment. For so long she had been a shadow in the background, convinced she could never truly belong. Yet here was Lila, calling her what she had secretly longed to be. And here was Christopher, on his knee, not asking her to fit into his world, but offering to build a new one together. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Christopher, she faltered, overwhelmed, pressing her forehead against Lila's hair for strength. Then she lifted her gaze, meeting Christopher's eyes. "I never dreamed love like this could be meant for me. But if you are certain, if this is truly what you want..." Christopher reached for her hand, steady and sure. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Elena's tears broke into a smile, radiant and unguarded. She whispered the only word that mattered, "Yes." Lila squealed with delight, flinging her arms around both of them. "Yes, yes, yes, we're a family now." Her little voice cracked with joy, and she pressed her head to Christopher's chest. "I have a mama. I have both of you." Christopher closed his arms around them, his heart near bursting. The velvet box slipped into Elena's trembling hands as if it had always belonged there. Above them, the sky blazed with the last light of day, painting the garden in gold. The world outside could mock, condemn, or gossip all it wished. Here, in this moment, nothing else mattered. The next morning, the mansion hummed with a kind of light it had never known. Where once cold marble echoed with silence, now it carried the music of laughter. Elena walked through the halls, hand in hand with Lila, while Christopher followed close behind, his eyes soft, his steps lighter than anyone had seen in years. The staff, who had watched from the shadows as grief hollowed the house, now exchanged knowing smiles. Something had shifted, something profound and irreversible. News of the broken engagement had already traveled through every corner of society, and now whispers swirled about this new chapter. The tabloids had their stories, the critics had their scorn, yet Christopher cared little. He had stood before the world unbending, declaring Elena and Lila his heart's truth. For him, there was no retreat. For Elena, however, doubt still flickered like a shadow at the edges of her joy. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Elena wandered into the garden once more. She touched the roses gently, her mind a storm of thoughts. Christopher found her there, as if drawn by instinct, and joined her quietly. She turned to him, her eyes shimmering with both happiness and fear. "You ever worry," she asked softly, "that one day you'll regret choosing me over the life you had planned?" Christopher reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "The life I had planned was empty, Elena. It was a house without warmth, a future without meaning. What I have with you and Lila, this is the life I never knew I was allowed to hope for." Her breath caught, her heart steadying in the face of his conviction. She nodded, pressing her forehead to his chest, his arms wrapped around her, anchoring her against the storm of uncertainty. And in that embrace, she understood. They had already weathered the worst together. What lay ahead would not be without battles, but they would not face them alone. Inside, Lila was busy arranging a small table with teacups and flowers. When Christopher and Elena entered, she beamed, declaring, "It's our first family tea party." She pulled them to the table, insisting they sit side by side while she poured water with careful concentration. Elena's laughter bubbled out, and Christopher's chest tightened with love. Even in the smallest of gestures, their family was already real. Later that week, Christopher invited close friends and allies to a quiet gathering, away from cameras and scrutiny. He stood before them, Elena and Lila at his side, and spoke words he had held close to his chest. "Years, I believed wealth could shield me from loss, that success could replace what my heart had lost. But no empire, no fortune could ever replace the gift I've been given here. Elena gave me back my daughter's joy. Together, they gave me back life itself. This is my family, and I will honor them above all." Tears filled Elena's eyes as murmurs of support rippled through the room. For the first time, she felt not like an intruder in Christopher's world, but as though the world itself was beginning to shift to make space for her. That night, when the house had quieted and Lila slept soundly in her room, Christopher led Elena to the balcony. The moon bathed her in silver light, and he slipped his arms around her waist. "You once told me you feared being unworthy," he whispered against her hair. "But Elena, it is I who am unworthy of what you've given me. A second chance, a home, a love I will never take for granted." Elena turned in his arms, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Then we'll never let go," she whispered, and in that moment their lips met, sealing not just a promise, but a vow unspoken. Whatever storms lay ahead, they would face them together. Days turned into weeks, and the mansion bloomed with new life. Lila's laughter was no longer rare but constant. Elena's smile no longer trembled with doubt but shone with confidence. And Christopher, once a man chained to grief and expectation, now walked freely, his heart unburdened. They had not just become a family, they had been reborn. And though society would always have its whispers, none of it mattered, for in the quiet golden hours of the garden, in the warmth of little arms around their necks, in the truth of love chosen freely, Christopher, Elena, and Lila had found what no wealth could purchase. They had found forever.